the screen. Okay, we are now recording, so I begin by taking the suggerent for Financial Resources Scrutiny Forum on Thursday the 18th of March 2021. Walter Brogan? No. Archie Buchanan? No. Janine Kalikes? Yeah, I can see that Janine is present. Are you able to hear us okay?
Did you call my name?
Yes, just to for the suggerent.
No, I didn't hear you, but I can hear you now. It's just
okay.
Coming
okay,
and going. It connection's really poor.
Okay, so yeah, you are present
here.
though. Okay, so Mary Donnelly? No. Grant Ferguson?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Eric Holford?
Here.
Martin Lennon? No. Monique McAdams?
Here.
Jared Wark?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Okay, do I have any other councillors present that I haven't mentioned? No. And officers present today, we have Jackie Taylor and Lorraine O'Hagan, Derek Craig and myself, Carol Lyon. I'll hand back to yourself, Chair.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much, and everybody welcome for coming on today. So I'll just ask, first of all, is anybody got any interest to declare? No, excellent. Okay, so I'll move on to item 2. So this is to agree the minutes of the previous meeting. So that's pages 3 to pages 6. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Excellent.
Propose or a seconder, maybe?
And is that you, Eric?
I'll propose those minutes, yes.
Thank you very much. You're such a gem. So you'll propose them. I'll second them then.
Well, there you are then, or do it the other way around, whichever you choose.
No, listen, I'm good for that. It's fine. Okay, I'll move on. So that's 1 to you. So I'll move on then. So item 3 then. So this is our General Fund Capital Programme. It's pages 7 to 28. And I'm going to I'll hand over to Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the first of 2 capital papers. This one is on our General Fund. It's covering the period up to the 29th of January. Section 5 of the report. Apologies, I'm having trouble seeing page numbers on my screen just now. So I'll try and refer to section numbers until I get that sorted. Section 5 of the report covers the financial implications and reports that the revised budget at the Executive Committee on the 10th of February was reported at £80.6 million for capital, and that included an allocation to meet COVID costs in relation to capital of just under £7.9 million. Section 5.2 of the report covers what we expect our outturn to be for the year, and just at the bottom of section 5.2, in summary, what we're reporting is that we do expect an underspend on our capital programme of around about £7 million, and that's in relation to the anticipated timing of project spend, and I'll come on to that in a second. Section 5.5 covers a little bit more around that £5 million underspend, and it relates mainly to projects within community and enterprise resources, £2.6 million, education resources of £2.3 million, housing and technical resources of £1.5 million, and smaller amounts within finance and corporate and social work resources. There is an appendix, which we will cover in a second, Appendix D, which details the main projects which are contributing towards the underspend with completion dates into 21-22. But as I mentioned, the reason for these underspends are mainly due to the timing of spend, which will mean the budget is required in 21-22 rather than the current financial year. And the funding, because this is capital, will merely fall into next year as well to meet those costs. One thing I did want to mention just at section 5.3 and 5.4 is around COVID. We mentioned that there was £7.8 million of budget currently available to meet the costs of COVID. At the moment, we do have commitments against the majority of those costs. But as we report at section 5.4, depending on how our revenue position progresses towards the end of the financial year, there may be the opportunity to use revenue budget to meet those costs. And that would then free up the capital budget available at the moment that's paying for COVID. That'll be continue to be monitored, and we'll report that back to the Executive Committee in due course. So that may mean that £7.8 million of capital funding isn't required to meet the cost of COVID. In terms of the appendices of the report, appendix, again, sorry, I'm struggling with the page numbers here. So the first appendix covers our resources, the total budget that we have across each individual resource, coming to 80.684.
Okay, so that's Appendix A, and
Thank you,
it is
Chair.
page 10. I'll just
Thank
jump in and help you with that, right?
I'll be able to, once we go into questions, I'll be able just to fix my system, but I don't want to do that at the moment just in case it breaks something. So I appreciate your help. Thanks, Chair. On the next page, which will be Appendix B, I assume,
Yep.
This gives us the full detail of every service and their budget allocations for a capital programme. The right-hand column shows the actual spend to date, and we're reporting that up to the 29th of January, we're seeing spend of £45.5 million across the projects detailed there. Moving on to Appendix C.
Page 12.
Thank you, Chair. This is showing our income source for the programme. And again, repeating myself from previous meetings, but you'll see that the majority of our funding comes from borrowing and also from grant from the Scottish Government. That makes up the far biggest part of our funding for projects. Moving on to what will be page 13, if I'm following this. This actually is Appendix D, which I mentioned earlier, which is the list of projects which are contributing to our underspend this year. So you can see the list of projects over resources and also the anticipated completion date in the right-hand side. If I then move on to page 14, this is where our progress, our physical progress starts, and I'll hand over to Derek to take us through that.
Thanks, Chair. Page 14 then, as Jackie said, we have the build executive summary, and we're showing that there's one project behind programme, and over the page on page 15 it's noted as Kilbride Early Learning Centre, which is up in East Kilbride. Projects had some issues with the COVID lockdowns and some issues with delivery of materials to site, so those works have been delayed by about 4 weeks. So end of May, end of April, beginning of May, we hope to achieve full completion of that project. Moving on to page 16, the non-build executive summary. We have 6 projects noted as behind programme, and jumping to page 18, there's a list of those 6 projects. So it begins with extension of cemeteries and landworks. The project's behind due to land acquisition for Douglas Cemetery, not progressing as anticipated. And the next one is Abington Campus for Enterprise, is a project delayed while awaiting confirmation of additional funding from Scottish Government, and they were hoping that that contract had been, well, it was awarded at the early part of January, and it hopefully commence very soon thereafter. Hamilton Hub, the New Cross Shopping Centre, funding for this project was awarded in 2020 November, but restrictions have meant that we are not able to carry out some elements of the work, and they'll now fall into 21-22. The Town Centre Regeneration Fund, there's a project behind due to the COVID restrictions on the individual projects within Community and Enterprise Resource Committee, so elements of the work will now fall into 21-22. They've been delayed. The IT infrastructure, again, the remainder of the works now fall into 21-22 because of COVID-19 restrictions, and the new website, the CRM, And the customer portal, some elements of that project have also been delayed and now fall into 21-22. Moving on to the roads executive summary on page 19, there is two projects behind programme being shown, and across the page onto page 20, they're both Sustrans projects, and they've both had issues with supply chain delays. So they've had confirmation that the Sustrans money is able to be carried forward into 21-22, and that will continue on. That's all on the operational progress, Chair.
That's great. Thanks very much to both of you. So can I just open it up for questions then? Grant.
If we refer back to page 18,
okay.
At the very bottom, it says something about IT refresher, CRM, obviously well known. What is MDM? Can you explain what that actually stands for?
Right, okay, so who would be best for that? Would that be you, Derek? Oh no, actually.
I'm afraid not. It's one of those IT projects that I'm not involved in, but
I'll take that one, Chair, but only to report that unfortunately I'm not an IT expert. I should know what MDM stands for because I've heard it a few times. However, it's escaping me just now.
Because CRM is Customer Relationship Management.
Yes, MDM is...
Yeah, I understand what that one means. It's just the MDM. What does that actually stand for?
Apologies to Grant, that was me basically speaking out loud, saying, working out what CRM stood for and trying to think, what would MDM mean? So it was just me.
I think in terms of obviously moving ahead in the future, all these kind of acronyms should have in brackets what they actually mean, because any new members coming into this don't understand what they mean. So a little bit of an explanation would be preferable, just in terms of missing out, or myself missing out on what that actually means. MDM, I'm just looking at it thinking, what is that? So the full actual wording in brackets would be great, and then we can obviously be more inquisitive when it comes to the budget and everything. The other thing that I wanted to say was the new website. Can someone explain what that is actually for? Could be anything if you're just saying new website. So what does it mean? Specifically.
Councillor Ferguson, on your point around expanding out the acronyms, I'll absolutely take that on board. I think that's an excellent suggestion. I could see Lorraine maybe Googling at the time there. Master Data Management.
That came up. Or also the other one was mobile data management, but master data management sounds like something I've heard before.
Yeah.
So we can find out exactly for you, Grant, so you know what it is one way or another.
Absolutely. I'll take that question back, and even
that'd be preferable. Thank you.
And even the words aren't exactly, helping me understand what that means. So we'll take that as a question and get a response. In terms of the new website, I believe it's updates to our current website to make it more accessible, modern. But again, I'd probably want to speak to Tom Little and Brian Tees just to get the full details for you, Councillor Ferguson, on that.
Okay, just coming back off that then.
Okay.
New website, so you're saying that could be an upgrade basically, or is it an actual replacement of the website?
Again, I'll have to take that back to Tom. It's not an upgrade, I don't believe. If anything, it's an update, as in to the way that it looks, the way that people are able to move around the website. But again, I would like to bring you back up.
Again, that's something that needs clarification when it's brought to the table here, because I'm not really sure what that means when you say it's a new website. So that needs more clarification as well. Not for my benefit. I mean, obviously I work in IT anyway. That's my background. But I think obviously for new people coming into this kind of meeting, we're talking about new websites and acronyms that might not be initially understood. Yeah, so all these different things could be worded a bit better. with more clarification on someone who's maybe a newbie, just for everyone's benefit, I think. Thank you.
Grant, all of that is completely correct and completely acceptable, and that's definitely things that we will look into. Was there anything else that flagged up apart from that? Because I'm very much aware we've not been able to answer any of your questions.
I might have something later on, so I'll hold on to that just now.
Thank you. Okay, Eric, you were next.
Just before I ask I'll say what I was going to say. There's a deep irony in this. The new website, part of it is to consider the fact that the average reading age of the average user of our website has been determined as about 9. And so one of the big exercises that they're trying to do is to reduce the complexity of the language and remove things like Latin, for example, ECT, EG, IE, etc., are all to be removed in order to make it simpler and easier to understand. And that's reported on here in language which none of us understood. So that, I think, is deeply ironic. All I was actually going to say, though, was the Abington, on the same page, actually, 18, Abington Campus for Enterprise. I went down there on Monday, and it is very much underway and flying forward. It's an absolutely fantastic project and well underway. So thank you for anybody who's involved in that. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. And we love your irony. So then I'm sure there's going to be loads more of it anyway throughout this meeting. So I'll just be waiting for the next bit. Janine, you had your hand up previously. Do you still have a question?
No, what I was going to say, Eric has covered, because I think Eric and I both sit in the equal ops. So it was just to sort of underscore that point that actually the public are supposed to be able to understand these papers as well. So totally agree with both Grant and Eric's points.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I thought that they were making it for age 12, not age 9.
Oh, it might be 12. I might be wrong, but is that something like that?
Because I think that's what newspaper articles are written for, age 12, isn't it? Because that's your average reading age.
Actually, I think it was 9 when I think about it.
That's even worse.
It's appalling. It's absolutely appalling.
It was 9.
Yeah, especially as we're responsible for education as well.
So
there we are.
I know. I'm going to move swiftly on for that one.
Yes.
So I'll propose. Who fancies seconding?
I'll second it.
Oh, thanks.
Grant, second that.
Oh.
Do you know what?
Take your pick.
I'm going to take Jared, actually, because I think he got in first. So I don't want MD saying I've got favourites in this forum. Jared, it was you. Right, okay, I'm going to move on. So, and thank you for both of you, for Jackie and Derek. Right, so we'll move on to item 5 then. So this is, oh no, we're not moving on to item 5. We're moving on to item 4, apologies. So this is pages 29 to 34, and this is our Housing Capital Programme. And Jackie, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Chair. And I've now got my page numbers back, so I'm all good. So on page 29, we have the capital report for housing this time round. Section 5 of the report confirms that the housing capital programme is £48.2 million and spend to the 29th of January is £31.5 million, which is roughly where we expect to be at this point in the year. We are expecting that the full £48 million will spend this year for the housing programme. I take you on to the appendices. On page 31, Appendix A shows the funding for the housing capital programme, and we can see there in the bottom half of the table that the funding predominantly comes from grant from the Scottish Government and also from the housing revenue account, which generates its income through rents for council houses. On page 32, there's the profile graph, which shows how we expected to spend our money this year and the reality of how we have spent it. And as I've reported before, obviously the pandemic has affected the amount of money that we're able to spend this year and the projects able to be completed. On page 33, we have our physical progress, and Derek can take us through that.
Okay, thanks. We have 3 projects towards the end of January that were behind where we anticipated, and across on page 34, we've listed them there. So Camelin Crescent in Blantyre, we've had delays obtaining resources. This has resulted in the project being having to be reprogrammed slightly. At Hamilton Central area, the external fabric repair project, poor weather conditions on site have caused a bit of a delay in January. And at 12 West Welbury Crescent, we've had poor weather conditions also in Hamilton, causing delay to this external works. So these 3 projects are noted as behind. That's all, Chair. Thanks.
That's great, thank you. Okay, so I'll just open that up for questions. Eric, I can see your hands up first.
Simple, straightforward, and non-ironic question. What was the land sales that contributed to £139,000 on page 31?
The land sales, right, okay.
I'll have to get details for you, Councillor, on that. I don't have a list of the land sales to hand for this meeting, but I can get those for you.
No problem at all. Thank you very much. Can I open it up to see if anybody else has got any questions? No, we're good. Derek, you're getting off with this so easy today, haven't you? And before I obviously look for a seconder, I just say to you, which I forgot to say last time, thank you so much for your contribution today, and hopefully that'll make up for me missing out on you at the last meeting.
No worries, Chair, thank you.
No problem at all. So I'll propose this item. Can I have a seconder? Grant, thank you very much. Okay, so we will move on then to item number 5. So this is pages 35 to 50, and this is the revenue budget monitoring. Jackie, can I hand it over to you, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This report is very similar to reports that I've brought to the forum before, so hopefully it is familiar to you. However, I will summarise the kind of key parts of it just to remind everybody of the position. This report, whilst it's not perhaps as long as other reports we have seen on the revenue budget, it does really just focus on 2 particular things, and that is how much we expect to spend as a council this year, both on our what I'll call normal business, but also on COVID. And as you'll appreciate, COVID spend has been a significant feature in our reporting of spend this year. So I'm going to start with COVID, and that's at section 4 of the report. And this report really just reminds us of what we've reported before. We had reported that we expected that the net cost of COVID was £4.6 million. And what I mean by that is that after taking account of everything that we expect to spend and netting off the income that we are getting in relation to COVID from the Scottish Government, we were expecting to be short by £4.6 million. However, we were then advised of further income from the government, and that was in relation to the fact that councils had, and Alios, our leisure trust, for example, had experienced loss of income over the year because of facilities being closed. So we received extra money from the Scottish Government of £2.7 million, and that's detailed at the top of page 36. So that meant that we then had a revised shortfall in our COVID position of £1.9 million. And that's what hopefully members recall as being our position for the council, a shortfall of 1.9 on COVID. In terms of our non-COVID position, we were reporting a position that is summarised in section 5 and at table 1. So we can see there at table 1, and that's probably the easiest place to see this. We were forecasting an underspend in relation to our non-COVID services of just over £2 million, of £2.1 million. And that's shown there in the fourth line of Table 1, our underspend of £2.163 million. Now that is after we have transferred money to reserves. And again, this reflects what I've reported in previous reports. The Executive Committee is charged with approving any transfers of money to reserves, and that has been done. And there's an appendix, which we'll cover in a second, which details all of those approved transfers to reserves. So that was leaving us with, as I say, an underspend on non-COVID services of just over £2 million. When we then take into account the fact that we were expecting a shortfall in relation to COVID funding of £1.9 million, we were left with a revised overall position for the Council of £261,000 of an underspend. So that's really Table 1 that I'm summarising for you there. In terms of what makes up that underspend for the non-COVID services, that £2.163 million, that's detailed in Table 2, and that's at the bottom of page 36. And that's predominantly an underspend in relation to our collection of council tax and also our council tax reduction subsidy. So that means that we have collected a bit more council tax than we expected this year, but we've also underspent on our council tax reduction scheme funding. So this is benefit, council tax benefit that individuals can claim. But what we should point out though is that we did receive extra funding in relation to the council tax reduction scheme. So whilst we've had probably more claims for benefits, we have underspent because we had additional funding provided. I go over to page 37. At section 6, we cover our financial position to the 29th of January, because this report also gives us a position statement as at that point in time. And we are showing an underspend of £2.2 million. So that is in line with where we expect it to be in relation to our probable outturn for our non-COVID services. In relation to COVID services, as at the 29th of January, Section 6.2 starts to talk about that, and a full summary is shown in Table 4, which is over on page 38. In this Table 4 at the top of page 38 is the table that I usually take the forum through. You can see the levels of spend that we've made at that top line of 15.5 million. We've lost income of 5.1 million. We haven't been able to achieve some savings because of the pandemic of just under £500,000. But we have seen some of our budget that we would normally have spent, and we haven't spent that because of the pandemic, so that can help contribute towards some of these extra costs. There's been some spend that we classify as food fund spend, and that merely reflects the fact that there was some specific monies identified which was called food fund, and we allocated that against specific funding, specific spend, and that left a total expenditure of £21.5 million. You can see that in that table. We've utilised COVID funding that we've received to date that equals £21.5 million. So as at the 29th of January, we are not in a shortfall position. Section 6.6 talks about our social work spend. And as I've reported before, the way that we are being funded for spend in relation to the pandemic on social care has been treated differently. This is something that the Scottish Government are funding. Health and social care, they're funding separately through what we call the mobilisation plan, and we're required to claim against that plan on a regular basis. All of the spend that we're making in relation to social care is being reimbursed, and as at the 29th of January, our spend was just over £17 million, and we're claiming that back. It's actually the Health Board that gets the funding, and we have to claim from the Health Board. So that's ongoing. Section 6.7 covers an update in relation to COVID funding, and at the time this report was written, at the 29th of January, there were a few pockets of other funding that was identified that would contribute towards COVID. Since then, there have been other pots of money that have been advised to us by the government in relation to funding for COVID, some in relation to the next financial year, but we'll get it this year. So whilst I've talked at the first part of this report about a shortfall in terms of our funding for COVID. Because we've now been advised of more funding, that's now not the position we're in, and we're able to cover all of our COVID costs for this financial year. Obviously, as we move into 21-22, we will have some funding available for COVID, but the level of spend that we'll have to incur is still variable, because we don't know, in terms of restrictions, how quickly they'll be released and how quickly we'll go back to being able to reduce down the amount of money that we're having to incur in terms of responding to the pandemic. That is our general services and our COVID position. Our housing revenue account also is part of this report, and that's covered at section 7. And it feels a bit measly in terms of its content, but what we're reporting is that our housing revenue account is actually breaking even this year, which is a positive position too. There are a number of appendices that accompany this report, and I'll take you through those. There are some with some good information in them for your perusal. So on page 40, we have Appendix 1, which is our COVID expected spend position. So you'll remember from a few moments ago, I was referring to a shortfall of £1.9 million. So that is the balance that's on this table at the bottom line of £1.9 million. But what this table does is take you through our expected spend across resources to get to that end column total. So it covers spend, lost income, and spend not made, and then the number of funding sources that we're using to cover these costs. And you can see that there are a number of funding sources that have been identified, and there are even more now that we've been identified through the budget process for the Scottish Government. So that's a good source of information around COVID spend. Appendix 2, which starts on page 41, is our usual detailed analysis of our budgets and spend across departments. So Appendix 2A, which is on page 41, and page 42 covers Appendix 2B, covers our spend before any transfers to reserves. So page 42 gives the same information, but on a spend type basis, so employee costs, property costs, rather than by individual services. Page 43 covers the same information over services, but after transfers to reserves. The reason we have to show these positions before and after transfers to reserves is because the auditor requires us to show it in that way. So they're covered on pages 43 and 44 after transfers to reserves. Appendix 4 on page 45 actually details all of the transfers to reserves that have been approved. So there's a number of transfers there. This replicates the appendix that was in the last report, as there's been no additions or changes to those approvals since the last meeting. Appendix 5 is also a good source of information for what we've spent in relation to COVID up to the 29th of January. So there's full lists there of the type of spend that we've had to make across resources. So additional costs are covered in that appendix on page 46. We've got lost income that starts halfway down the table on page 47. And we've got some unspent budget that's detailed there at the bottom of the table on page 48. Appendix on page 49, which is Appendix 6, covers our housing revenue account, and that's our normal monitoring statement showing our budgets and our variances with some explanations for members there as well. So a lot of information in there, but very much in line with what we've been reporting up till now, but happy to take any questions, Chair. Thanks.
That was great. It's well laid out, nice and clear as always, Jackie. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair.
Pleasure. Eric, you've got your hand up.
I have. Yeah, page 35, 36 that goes over the page. The 1.9 million shortfall. Am I right in thinking that with the extra funding that we've got, that 1.9 million is effectively no longer the outturn? It was the outturn when this was written. So have we got an actual predicted outturn for the year, or are we going to show a surplus, but then presumably carry some of that forward?
Yeah, exactly. Because of the way that our funding is now being provided, we are getting funding that relates to 21-22.
Right.
but we're getting it in this current financial year. So you're absolutely right. We will have, call it a surplus of funding at the end of this financial year that we will carry forward into 21-22, and that will help us meet the costs that we know that we'll incur in 21-22.
So
in relation
what would our probable outturn then come out to for the year?
That's what we will get to when we go through our year-end process. So we do know that we've had significant sums from the government in relation to COVID funding that is for 21-22. So it will be a significant sum of money that we will physically have the cash for, but it relates to next year.
Yet.
So we don't know the cost yet. Well, we have obviously we've anticipated what our cost may be, but that can only be an estimate at this point in time.
It depends when we come out of lockdown and all the other bits and pieces.
Exactly. Our costs, as reported in this paper, shouldn't change dramatically because we're getting near to the year end. So our costs for 2021 are estimated in this report, and they should be relatively accurate. But going into 21-22, we don't know where we'll be. You're right.
One other thing, I'm just interested in the council tax position. We've got an over recovery. Part of that is from council tax reduction scheme funding that we've got. What's the sort of breakdown of that? You got any more detail on where that comes from, how that works?
We do. We'll have a full breakdown of that. I'm just trying to see if it's actually reported in this detail.
I didn't see it, but that doesn't mean it's not there.
That
I didn't see it.
It's summarised at section 5.4. Lorraine, I don't suppose you have any information readily to hand?
Not off the top of my head, but I'm sure the split is there between council tax and CTRS. I just can't quite get to it at the moment, but if you bear with me, I'll try to find it.
Give Lorraine a second as she peruses the...
Yeah,
what I'm trying to get to is why we've got a surplus of council tax recovery money, or have we? Why would we be paid more than we have to pay out?
And I can answer that question for you. We have two ways of funding council tax reduction scheme. We have money that's provided from the government, but the council also has its own element of budget that we've put into that. So whilst the government is looking to give us more money because it appreciated that we were having to pay out more, the council still had its own allocation that we would normally put into council tax reduction scheme. So if it's okay with you, councillor, what we'll do is we'll get a full breakdown of that for you because it is to hand, but it does show that actually our commitments in terms of council tax reduction scheme isn't going down. It's just the way that it's been funded that's helped us this year.
Yeah, that's a good question.
It does seem counterintuitive that in current times we would be seeing less requirement to spend on benefits, but that's not reflected in this position of an underspend. That's not the case.
Yeah, I expected to see an overspend or an under recovery or whatever.
Yeah.
There we are.
That's good. That's great. Grant, I can see you've got your hand up. What was your question?
Okay, so from page 41.
Okay. Yeah.
So where it says departments and environmental services.
Okay.
It says on the right hand side it gives the percentage 14.9%.
Right, 144.9%.
So obviously that seems quite a lot. So do you think that's linked to COVID? Can you maybe give some details on that, why that's gone up quite significantly?
Thanks for the question. It probably could be in relation to COVID, and in the detailed papers that Lorraine will cover in a second, we will have the details of any significant variances. And unfortunately, this year, a lot of our variances are absolutely due to COVID. If you just give me a second, I'll just have a quick look to see if I can identify anything in environmental through those papers that will give us a quick answer for you, councillor. There is, again in the papers that Lane will cover, there is an overspend in relation to environmental, and that's in relation to our fleet services, which isn't directly linked to COVID. It's just linked to the timing of achievement of efficiencies within fleet that they will be covering elsewhere within the resource. So that one's not directly linked to COVID.
Right, okay. Okay. So yeah, just because I noticed there was quite a bit of an increase, and I was looking for the details on that. I mean, usually, it's roughly about the same. The overspend, the underspend, but it's jumped up quite a bit. So that's why I was wondering. I noticed that, and I thought that's the question.
Thank you. Thanks.
No, it's a good question to ask. Is that in relation to page 58, or do you want to just cover that when we go into that report?
That is on page 58, Chair. Now, that's not a new variance. That's been there in previous periods as well, but that's the reason why that big percentage, and it does come out as a big percentage because it's a relatively small budget line. So those percentages that Councillor Ferguson's mentioned is a good measure against the size of budget, but it's about £770,000 over, and that is on page 58, Chair.
Okay, doke. Grant, do you have any further questions?
No further questions for that.
Okay, doke, no problem at all.
It was just something that caught my eye, that's all.
Okay, thank you very much, Grant. Okay, so thanks for that, Jackie. So if I propose it, can I have a seconder? Oh, Lorraine, you've got your hand up.
Apologies, I just wanted to say that in terms of the council tax and CTRS, you can see it in the appendix of the report. So council tax reduction schemes underspent by 810,000 and council tax is over-recovered by 1.765 million. And that makes up the overall position. I didn't think to go to the appendix when we were first talking. I was trying to look through the report, which is more difficult, making it hard for myself.
That's okay, it's much appreciated. Were you going to say something else?
Trying to find it for you, Councillor. It's on page 43. So you can see the greyed out box and you can see the probable outturn variance on the right hand side of that box.
Yeah. Right, lovely. Thank you.
Okay. Is that okay, Eric?
That'll do. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Walter, I can see you've joined us. Welcome. I know that you had major IT problems.
Thank you very much. The Whirlies was a challenge getting home as well. That's chock-a-block with traffic. But anyway, apologies for being late.
That's fine. Don't mention Stuartfield Way. Start a rammy. Okay.
Triple bypass.
I know. Thinking of having one myself. Okay, so if I propose this, can I have a seconder, please? Janine, you seconding it for me? Thank you very much. Okay, Lorraine, I'll just move on to you. So we're going to do item 6. This is pages 51 to 144. It's the detailed resource analysis, and Lorraine will take us through it. Thanks, Lorraine.
Thank you, Chair. The detailed resource position starts with community and enterprise, and that's on page 53. So again, you can see the probable outturn, which remains the same as last time in terms of the greyed out box for the resource area. And the bottom line position is in the bottom right hand corner, and it's 6.689 million. But obviously a significant portion of that is in relation to COVID. The detailed variances start for community and enterprise on page 54. Now there's only one new variance for the resource this period, and it's actually on page 64. So I'll scoot to that, and then if there's any other questions, we can go back. So page 64, if I can find it. Can't get that far. Here we go.
Sorry, Lorraine, I really apologise to interrupt you there. Can you try and slow down a wee bit? It's just that obviously Grant's looking down to change pages and then looking back up, missing just some tiny wee bits. Okay. Sorry for interrupting.
No bother at all. So page 64 is the one variance that we have for community and enterprise resources, and that's in the income side. It's almost at the bottom of the page, and it's the one that's underlined. And it's fees and charges, departments of the authority, 86 over recovered in total, but within fleet and environmental services, there's a new variance of 50,000 over recovered. And that's mainly due to the provision of clinical waste services and is the income that offsets the additional expenditure within the resource. And that's the only new variance this period for community and enterprise.
That's great, Lorraine. Thank you. And Tracy, never apologise because you have nothing to apologise for.
No
Part of
problem.
the team.
I don't like him interrupting there, but I was just trying to make sure that he was still included.
No, 100%, and you must always do that, or we would be annoyed otherwise.
Yeah, we need a slow down emoji.
I can't see the emojis when I'm reading the papers, though.
Okay, so
but it doesn't work.
so anyway,
Two screens. You need two screens, split screens.
That's it. Yeah.
So, has anybody got any questions about that one? No. Right. Okay. Excellent. We'll just move on then, Lorraine.
Okay. Education resources is the next resource, and that starts on page 71. So again, you can see the probable outturn just for reference in the grey box. And on the right-hand side, we have an overspend of 6.108 million, with 5.297 being attributed as a transfer to reserves at the moment. And we've also got a significant variance in terms of COVID position. In terms of new variances, again, for the resource, there's only one new variance this period, and that's on page 79. I'll give you a minute or two to scoot to that. And at the top of page 79, again on the income side, we have a new income line for other local authorities, fees and charges, and that's within schools. And the over-recovery reflects payments from other local authorities for placements within South Lanarkshire Council establishments. And that over-recovery partially offsets some of the additional expenditure we've incurred in terms of independent school places. And that's the only new variance for education.
Okay, that's excellent. Does anybody have any questions? No. Excellent. Right, we'll just move on, Lorraine. On to our next resource.
That's the corporates next then. And that starts on page 87, again with the resource position, and the bottom line 4.640 overspend as at period 11. There are probably about a dozen new variances, but Chair, if you'll indulge, I'll just go through the ones that are over about 50,000 or so.
Yeah.
Just to cut that down a little bit, and obviously we can answer any questions as they come up.
Okay.
But the first one is on page 88, and that's finance transactions. We've got an underspend there reflecting current vacancies within the service area.
Mm-hmm.
The next ones are on page 91, within supplies and services, and that's foodstuffs general within personnel services. And we've got an underspend there again because of the closure of cafes in the coal yard as a result of the pandemic. At the bottom of page 92, we have an underspend there for telephones, so that's IT services there, and that's within administration costs, and the underspend reflects lower than anticipated telephone expenditure, which is offset by an under-recovery of income, so we're obviously incurring less costs in relation to telephone spend. At the top of the next page, page 93, again within IT services, and this is in a similar vein, we've got a reduction in the level of, that's not actually true, but an overspend in relation to mobile phones. I think that's maybe a switch between the two in terms of usage, and we'll be offsetting that with additional income from recharges. The next variance is on page 97. That's on the income side. So within finance transactions, we have an over-recovery there relating to the receipt of payment deduction project income from the Department of Work and Pensions, and personnel services, an under-recovery there reflecting the timing of the receipt of income for externally funded projects. And I think that's us for the resource. Oh, no, tell a lie, there was one other one I picked out at the bottom of page 100. And again, it's linked to the telephone spend that we talked about earlier. So we've got an under-recovery, a net under-recovery there in terms of telephones and mobile phones.
Okay, that's excellent. Thanks, Lorraine. Does anybody have any questions about this resource? No. Oh, yes, Eric?
Sorry, you don't get off that lightly. No, I'm just thinking the underspend on landline telephones and the overspend on mobiles. Well, the overspend is a fraction of the underspend. Why are we spending so much on landline calls? Why is it more expensive to use landlines than mobiles? Not really a question for you, I suppose, but it just struck me as rather odd. We should get rid of our landlines and just go on to mobiles. No, anyway, that's probably enough. I'm just whittering, really. Sorry.
Okay.
I think if anybody wants to answer it, I'm totally fine with it.
I would like to be able to answer, but I don't know the details of that.
I would like to dump the mobile phone I've got. It's absolutely useless.
I did that right on day one. I'm afraid I've been using my own.
It's not yet. They have made an improvement. You know, being able to sign on with your finger, that's absolutely wonderful.
Within a day of getting my first mobile phone from the council, I threw it across the room at the wall. How I didn't smash it, I don't know. But it certainly was my intent. Because trying to put 8 digits into a phone with my fingers, and you only get 10 attempts, was impossible. I had to get someone else to open my phone for me. And that's just not secure. So I have an iPhone. There we are. Anyway, that's irrelevant. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I mean, it's good that we're all getting it out there. Does anybody else get anything that they would like to share? Jared? Janine?
Nah.
Grant? No?
My phone's fine.
Well, I'll
again, I don't think you caught this in the beginning, Eric. If you're not happy with our mobile phones, maybe we could back to Pigeon Post as well as what we were talking about earlier on, Monica.
Yeah, Grant, spot on.
Yeah, my handwriting's not great for the pigeons, so writing those wee bits of paper always was a struggle.
It's the answer that's important, not the speed of getting it there.
It's this is the best one, isn't it? That's your favourite committee, isn't it, Jackie?
It is actually.
So anyway, if there's no other questions, we'll save our dialogue for the next resource, and I'll just move you on, Lorraine.
Okay. The next resource is Housing and Technical Resources. It starts on page 107, again with the summary position for the resource culminating in a bottom line position of 645 over after transfers to reserves.
Just a second, sorry, Lorraine. We're still catching up on pages here.
Okay.
And I'm going to need that amount again.
Page 107. Okay now?
Yep, carry on.
Housing and Technical is on page 107. So again, you can see the position for the year in the greyed out box, and on the right hand column, the variance as at period 11, which is 645 of an overspend there, which includes COVID spend for the resource. The variances start on the next page, page 108, but the first, or the only new variance I should say, is on page 112. And it's at the top of that page, and we have under recovery, within housing, and that reflects contributions from other bodies, and it is an under recovery in one-off income to deliver specific projects with partners, including the Home Office for refugee settlement, and it's offset by a reduction in expenditure. So obviously the project hasn't taken place or taken place to the same extent. And that's all for that resource.
Okay, that's excellent. I'll open the floor up to questions then. No. Right, okay, smashing. Lorraine, we get to move on.
Okay, the next service area is the housing revenue account. That's on page 121. But this period there are no new variances. So the detail that you have on pages 121 and 122 are really just a bit more detail in terms of the paper that Jackie went through earlier, in terms of the summary for the housing revenue account. So I've got nothing to highlight there, Chair.
Okay, I'll just open it up though, just in case anybody does have any questions about that resource.
That's fine.
No questions for that resource. We'll just move on, Lorraine.
Okay, the final resource then is social work resources, and that's on page 127. So again, you can see the greyed out box showing the variance for the year, and on the right hand side we have a variance of 314 over for social work as at the 29th of January.
Is that 314?
Yes, 314. Again, there were probably about half a dozen or so variances within the resource. I'll just go through them. And these are new variances again. So page 129, we have an overspend there in justice services, and that's in relation to turnover being less than anticipated to date. If I can take you on to page 133, we have fuel charges into the line, and that's showing a £56,000 overspend there, and that's the cost associated with staff travelling separately due to COVID-19, and that's mainly within the home care environment. The next variances to highlight are on page 134. So again, we've got expenditure on medical costs within the COVID-19 banner, and that relates to the cost of medical equipment, for example, thermometers. We've got an underspend within children and families, 62,000, reflecting the demand in relation to adoption cases, where the adoption is contested. And the next one down, adults and older people, we've an underspend there as a result of the ongoing pandemic. The level of legal costs have reduced. So again, a new variance for this period. Over the page 135, we have a variance within adults and older people in terms of payments to voluntary organisations, and that's due to some services not being delivered due to the pandemic. And I think that's us for the resource. Yep, there's no other new variances to highlight.
Okay, I'll just open it up then for questions. Any questions then, because that's our final resource. Maybe getting off lightly with that one, Lorraine, as well.
I think so. That's very kind.
Eric, honestly, is there nothing you want to ask?
You know, I always wonder at the end when they sit there, when Jackie and Lorraine sit there and we don't ask any questions, are they sitting there thinking, I hope they don't ask about this, or I hope they don't ask? I bet they are.
No,
so
not at all.
No, and you'd admit it, of course.
Grant, I bet you've got something tricky up your sleeve. Come on, do not let them off lightly.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson.
No, I don't have anything. Anything unless it's IT related. That's the only thing. So if it's anything linked to IT, then that would be my thing.
Yeah, but you know we don't know anything about IT.
Not even the acronyms.
Indeed.
Yeah. Well, listen, right, okay, so, well, thanks very much for that. So I'll propose this. Can I have a seconder then for this item? That was number 6.
I'll second it.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, so moving on then, item number 7. This is our items for urgent business, of which we have none. So I'll just propose that we have none. And Eric, do you want to second that?
If you like.
Yay! Right, okay, everybody, thanks very much for your time, for your questions, and for everything else. It's much appreciated. So I'll just say to Carol, thanks very much, and if you could just stop the recording, then that would be great.